The phone rings. No name needed to know what happens next in most people's bodies. A small, immediate spike of something close to alarm. Not because anything is wrong. Not because the caller is unwelcome. Simply because the phone is ringing. And ringing means now, means immediate, means a conversation has to begin before there has been a single second to prepare for what it might contain. Compare this to the arrival of a text message. The same content, the same person, the same potential conversation, but received without urgency, sitting quietly until there is room for it. No immediate performance required. No real-time pressure to have the right words ready before the silence becomes uncomfortable. For an enormous number of people, this difference is not trivial. It is the entire reason a generation has developed something close to an aversion to the ringing phone, while remaining completely comfortable, even enthusiastic, about constant digital conversation through text. And the common explanation for this, that people have simply become antisocial or too absorbed in their phones to talk to anyone properly, misses what is actually a coherent, well-documented psychological pattern. This video exists to take that pattern seriously, because the preference for text over calling is rarely about avoiding people. It is about something more specific, the difference between two fundamentally different modes of communication, and a growing recognition of which mode actually serves a person's mind well. The technical distinction at the center of this entire phenomenon is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication. A phone call is synchronous. Both parties must be present, attentive, and responsive at the exact same moment, in real time, with no opportunity to pause and reconsider before a reply leaves your mouth. A text message is asynchronous. The conversation exists across time rather than within a single shared moment, allowing each party to engage with it whenever they have the capacity to do so well. This distinction matters more than it appears to on the surface, because these two modes activate genuinely different cognitive and physiological processes. A phone call demands immediate language production under social observation. Your tone, your pacing, your responses are all happening live, with no edit function, while another person listens and forms judgments in real time. This is, neurologically speaking, a performance under mild but constant pressure. For some people, this pressure is negligible. For others, it activates something closer to a stress response, elevated heart rate, a scramble to formulate words quickly enough to avoid awkward silence, and the persistent fear of saying the wrong thing without any opportunity to revise it. Texting removes nearly all of this pressure. It allows what psychologists refer to as cognitive buffering, the ability to pause, reread, edit, and compose a response with full deliberation before it becomes real. For people who process language, emotion, or social nuance more slowly and carefully rather than spontaneously, this buffer is not a convenience. It is the difference between communicating well and communicating poorly. This single distinction begins to explain three recognizable psychological profiles, each gravitating toward text for a slightly different underlying reason. The first is the deliberate processor, someone whose mind simply does not generate its best thinking in real time. This person may have a great deal to say, considerable emotional intelligence, and genuine investment in their relationships. But their most accurate and thoughtful communication requires a beat of private reflection that a live phone call does not allow. Forced into spontaneous conversation, they often feel they are performing a flattened, less articulate version of themselves, not because they have less to offer, but because the format does not match how their mind actually works. The second is the boundary keeper, someone for whom an unscheduled phone call represents an unscheduled demand on their time and energy, regardless of how much they care about the caller. This is less about the format of communication and more about autonomy. A text can be answered in 30 seconds or 3 hours on the recipient's own terms. A ringing phone insists on an answer immediately, interrupting whatever was already occupying that person's attention, with no regard for whether the timing happens to be convenient. The third is the anxious avoider, someone whose discomfort with phone calls is rooted specifically in the unpredictability and exposure of live conversation. This profile often overlaps with broader patterns of social anxiety, where the absence of visual cues, the inability to plan responses, and the pressure of unbroken real-time exchange combine into something genuinely uncomfortable rather than merely inconvenient. What unites all three profiles is not avoidance of connection itself, but a preference for connection delivered on terms that allow for thought, autonomy, and emotional regulation. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward recognizing that the quiet relief someone feels when a call goes to voicemail is not a character flaw. It may simply be a mind that knows, with real precision, exactly what kind of communication allows it to function and connect at its best. There is a particular kind of relief that comes over a person the moment a ringing phone stops, the screen settles, and a single notification appears instead: missed call. Not relief at avoiding the person who called. Relief at being given back something the ring had momentarily taken away, control over the terms of the conversation about to happen. Understanding this relief requires looking more closely at the three profiles introduced earlier, because each one is protecting something specific, and each protection mechanism, once understood, reveals far more strength than the surface behavior suggests. The deliberate processor's relationship with text is, at its core, a relationship with accuracy. This is someone who has likely experienced, more than once, the particular frustration of hanging up a phone call and immediately thinking of the better, clearer, more precise way they should have said something, a thought that arrived only once the pressure of the live exchange had ended. Texting eliminates this lag entirely. It allows the deliberate processor to say the thing they actually mean, in the words they actually intend, rather than the words that happen to surface fastest under time pressure. This is not a person avoiding communication. This is a person insisting on communicating well, even if that insistence costs them the appearance of spontaneity that real-time conversation rewards. The boundary keeper's preference runs on a different mechanism entirely, one rooted in the protection of personal time as a finite, valuable resource. A phone call, by its nature, assumes the recipient's immediate availability without ever asking whether that assumption is accurate. The boundary keeper has learned, often through direct experience of depletion, that constant availability is not sustainable, and that protecting blocks of uninterrupted time is not selfish, but necessary for functioning well in every other area of their life. Choosing text is not a rejection of the relationship. It is an insistence that the relationship exist within boundaries the boundary keeper has consciously decided to maintain, rather than boundaries dictated by whoever happens to call first. The anxious avoider's experience deserves to be named with particular care, because the discomfort here is genuinely difficult rather than merely preferential. Phone calls remove nearly every tool this person typically relies on to manage social interaction. There is no visual cue to read, no pause long enough to plan a response, no way to revise a sentence once it has already left their mouth. For someone whose anxiety centers on performance and judgment, the phone call format is, quite literally, the most exposed version of communication available short of speaking in front of a crowd. Their preference for text is not avoidance of connection. It is a reasonable adaptation to a format that activates a stress response disproportionate to what the conversation itself actually requires. Research in this area, while still developing, offers genuine support for these patterns. Surveys conducted across multiple countries have documented a measurable rise in what researchers and clinicians sometimes call telephone apprehension or phone call avoidance, particularly concentrated among younger generations who came of age primarily communicating through text-based platforms. Much of this research remains correlational rather than fully causal, and individual experiences vary considerably, but the consistency of the pattern across different studies and populations suggests something real is occurring. Not simply a generational quirk dismissed too easily by those who came of age with the telephone as their primary mode of connection. It would be incomplete, however, to present this preference without acknowledging its genuine costs. Text strips away tone, inflection, and the subtle warmth of a human voice, meaning that messages are frequently misread, sarcasm lands as hostility, and brevity reads as coldness when none was intended. Relationships that exist primarily through text can lose a certain spontaneity and depth that live conversation makes possible almost effortlessly. And there are entire categories of conversation, grief, conflict, anything requiring real emotional presence, where a phone call, or better still a face-to-face conversation, genuinely serves the relationship more honestly than text ever could. The goal, then, is not to eliminate the phone call entirely or to defend text as universally superior. The goal is awareness, understanding precisely which profile drives your own preference, and using that understanding to choose your mode of communication deliberately rather than defensively. A deliberate processor can still pick up the phone when precision matters less than warmth. A boundary keeper can still make space, on their own terms, for the calls that genuinely deserve real-time presence. Even an anxious avoider can learn, gradually and without pressure, that some calls are worth the discomfort because of what they make possible. Before this video ends, take a moment to consider your own instinct the next time a call comes in unexpectedly. Notice what you feel in that half-second before you decide whether to answer. Is it the need for time to think clearly, the protection of a boundary you have worked hard to maintain, or something closer to genuine apprehension about the conversation itself? And once you know which one it is, what would it look like to honor that instinct on purpose, instead of simply reacting to it by default?